Well, the topic for tonight is how to be a good friend. Now, I do want to share with you some practical advice, but I would like to spend some time clarifying what friendship is and what it means to be a good friend, because putting it that way implies that you could be a friend and yet, at least in some respects, not a good friend. That's a little challenging because we think of friendship as a positive thing in and of itself. So to be a not good friend sounds like almost like a contradiction in terms. I want to start with a point which was maybe obvious, but its implications are pretty radical. Would you imagine someone is my friend, and he knocks on my door at 1:30 a.m. I'm desperate for a bottle of gin. Give me some gin. He has a problem. He has an alcohol problem. What would good friendship mean? Give him what he wants? His bottle of gin? Tell him no? So he won't get drunk? It's not obvious that I should just do what he wants. Maybe what a person wants is bad for him. When you think about it, it's pretty obvious. A good friend will do for his friend what's best for him. Sometimes, maybe the best thing for him is to follow his preferences and let him suffer the consequences, and he'll learn from that. Maybe that's the best thing for him. But certainly friendship doesn't mean, across the board, just do what he asks you to do. So really, the idea of being a good friend raises crucial issues. What is really good? What makes it good? What in the person is most important and second most important in terms of what's good for him? And then, how do you reach him? How do you actually interact with him to promote his real good? Yeah.
Would you say that being a good sibling for all this would constitute the same? All this would apply? Would you say that?
Being a good sibling, I think. I don't hear it that way, but it's just a matter of language. I don't think there's anything substantive here. Sibling is a matter of biology, so it's not the sort of thing which is good or bad.
Would you say there's a greater degree of responsibility or a difference in degree of loyalty, or a difference in how you would perspectivize?
Okay, so
that your friend is damaging to your life 5%, but you're helping him 50%. Maybe that would be unacceptable, but with a sibling, so.
Okay,
I'm not trying to derail. I just wanted to.
Okay, no, I think you're asking whether family ties create unique moral bonds, moral responsibilities of their own. I saw a paper in one of the journals of philosophy maybe 30 years ago where he made the following point. There isn't a single major school of ethics that gives preference to your family over other people. Now, you can look at it either way. You can say, well, people who favor their families are just out of touch with philosophy. Maybe that's good. I don't know. It's not so obvious that that's bad. Or you could say that all the major schools of philosophy, of ethics anyway, are failing to live up to an obvious ethical fact. I'm inclined to think the latter is true. I think that it's right to give preference to your family. The Torah certainly requires it. Don't hide from your own flesh. And secondarily to that, the people who are your neighbors, when you're giving out charity, you give out to the people of your city first before you go to other cities. So the Torah definitely has a hierarchy of concerns. The closer people are to you, then the more responsibility you have for them. So I think that's exactly right.
The reason I said sibling was because
but
I think a son or a parent would be completely, like, the concept of friendship would be secondary.
Okay, so that's tricky. It's a tricky thing there. As a matter of fact, there's no commandment concerning friendship no direct commandment concerning friendship, as far as I know. There's a commandment to love certain people, and there's no commandment to love the members of your family any more than anyone else. But that's something that has to be thought about. Except if you take into account what Rav Hirsch says, that the reason for laws that give preference of one Jew to another Jew over a Jew to a non-Jew is because the Jewish people really is a single family. We trace ourselves all back to one father. And it's an instance of giving preference to family members over non-family members. That's what Rav Hirsch explains those laws, basically. I was importing the idea of family to explain the relationship to the people. At any rate, the reason I didn't identify with what you said before is that good is usually associated with some kind of function. You know what something's for, what it's supposed to do, and then you talk about doing it well, doing it appropriately, doing it completely or incompletely. The idea of a sibling, which is just a biological fact, doesn't obviously signify any function whatsoever. You can impose it by using the concept of family, but the word sibling doesn't, It's sort of like saying, what is a good pencil? We know what makes something a good pencil. What is a good drop of oil? A drop of oil is a drop of oil. And that can't be good or bad, better or worse, it's just a drop of oil. That's what it is. It doesn't carry any implication of a function, in which case the word good doesn't directly apply. That's what I would feel about sibling. But that's not really essential to what we're trying to do. Anyway, let me start with the following observation. That there are two types of friends. Maybe there are 16, but there are two that can be distinguished. Friendships based on sharing pleasant activities. There are certain things that you like to do, and they're better done with other people than alone. And there are certain people who are good for sharing that particular activity. There are chess-playing friends, and there are political discussion friends, and there are tramping through the woods friends, and there are macrobiotic cooking friends. And when you engage in these activities, you have people who enjoy them with you. It's much more enjoyable and profitable to do it together with these friends. But the friendships are based on sharing a taste for certain activities. If your taste in activities changes, instead of macrobiotic cooking, you decide to take an interest in the lute music of Bach, certain people are going to leave you behind, and you'll find other people who enjoy Bach. These friendships are fluid, and they do definitely contribute to a person's life, and they switch into the switching of activities. Then, and that's the vast majority of a person's friends, sometimes all of them. Then there are friendships that are not based on shared activities, even if one or the other or both change their taste in activities, the caring for the other person will still be there. The interest in the other person, empathizing with the other person will still be there, because the relationship is based more on a core identity rather than particular activities or particular interests that the person has. Those friendships are very valuable, and they're very rare. And in terms of being a good friend, I think that's where the idea applies. Because there, in the other ones, you decide you enjoy playing golf together, so you play golf together. If you decide not to play golf, then you won't see him and you'll see somebody else. The concept of good doesn't apply as much there. The concept of good will apply to where you have this kind of personal, committed relationship. And more than committed, you can be committed to doing something that you find irritating and frustrating and just it feels as responsibility. No. There really is an element of love that comes into that kind of a relationship. In the Hasidim tell a parable, two drunk Russian peasants, maybe that's redundant, are in a bar, together, and one says, "Ivan, I love you," and he says, whatever the name this.
Prove it.
Yeah, huh?
Prove it.
No. The other one says, you do not love me. Yes, I love you. He said, no, you do not love me. Why do you say that? He said, because if you loved me, you'd know what hurts me. That's right. That's right. This kind of love that we're talking about now, friendship we're talking about now, is where I care about the person. I care about the person's, I empathize with the person. So I want to know what's going on in his life. I want to share with him what's going on in my life, and he's interested in me also. So of course I would know. I would know because I care, and I want to know, and I'm perceiving him and analyzing him. If something happens I don't understand, I ask him. I say, "Look, you look worried. Tell me what's going on. You look happy. What are you rejoicing about?" If I really loved him, I would know what's going on. So that's the second type of friendship. Now, when I talk about being a good friend, which means you could be a friend with, and in some ways fail to be good, I think what happens here is this. Friendship is good, but friendship carries with it certain expectations. You rely on a friend. And it can happen that for whatever reason, someone you rely on, for whatever reason, doesn't interact with you in the way that you expected, the way that you hoped, the way that you come to rely upon. And then you're hurt. And he's used the fact that you trust him and you rely upon him in a way which interests you. Now, he really is a friend. It isn't that he stops being a friend. If he stopped being a friend, you would have no complaint. I don't expect that kind of support from people who aren't my friends. If they're strangers, why should they go out of the way to support me? But notice, because he's your friend and because he's not living up to the expectations of friendship, then he would be not a good friend. So all this depends upon understanding what is really good for a person. What we expect from friends is that they will do things for people that are really good for them, not just what they enjoy, what they ask for. Yeah, sure.
We won't mess up the recording? No.
Not unless there's a demonstration outside like there was this morning. Took me 3/4 of an hour to get home from the Kaisel. There was a demonstration on the street.
And when you say an understanding of what's best for a person, so obviously that means speaking to them and hearing them, and that kind of is a prerequisite that you don't just...
But that's a means. That's a means. That means can be used in many different directions. I'm talking about the end you're working for. What do you want to happen to them?
So if you're becoming about Shula, and you have a friend in yeshiva with you, and you're both becoming religious together, and that's obviously a huge part of your bond, and then he starts going in the opposite way. So obviously that's gonna, and then, you know, I think what's best for him is to start being religious again. And he thinks what's best for him is to start being orthodox.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Irreligious. So would you say that falls under a shared activity? Or would you, because here we're talking about something more philosophical and value-based and not playing badminton. So which one of the two levels would you say that falls under? Because that's a difference in morality and truth. And
I don't think you can classify it that way. You could be in a yeshiva together. You could both be coming from together in one stop or whatever. And you could have either type of friendship. You could have a shared activity friendship, which is the shared activity of becoming from. And then if he decides to give it up, you say, well, it was nice knowing you. You know, this is what I'm doing. You're not doing it anymore. I'll look for other people to share with. I can't share it with you because you're not sharing it. And with no hard feelings. Or both being in the same yeshiva, both becoming from, may lead you to develop one of these mutual caring friendships where even if he stopped becoming from, you'd still care about him. If he went to India and studied Hinduism, you'd want to know what he was learning and you'd want to know what he's feeling. And if he was suffering, you would feel bad for him, the fact that he's suffering. So that the friendship would not be based on sharing a shared activity. It would be based on wanting to be part of his life and wanting him to be part of your life. Now, all that is secondary to the question I'm asking. Let's say you have a real friendship. What should you do? What should your goals be in interacting with the other person? It seems to me that what a real friend, a good friend, will want for his friend what is best for his friend. That's what he will want for him. He wants him to be successful. He wants him to have the greatest amount of good that he can possibly have. This will include cases where he's chosen a way that you think is wrong-headed.
Okay, but there's a difference between, I think you should be a radiologist and you think you should be a cardiologist, and I think this is what's best for you and you think this is what's best for you. I think it's going to be different than, because you're taking more practical elements into account. I think there's going to be a difference in calculation versus, I believe this is philosophical truth, and the other one says, no, I believe this is philosophical truth.
Mm.
A difference in opinion there, I think is going to affect the relationship on a much deeper level, because I care about a religious Jew more than I care about a secular Jew, which just because we have more, there's almost a blood tie there, but not blood, but there's a tie there that goes deeper than anything emotional.
I agree with what you're saying, but I don't see that it's addressing the point that I'm working with. I think it's sort of like coming in at right angles. It's not head on, and it's not going in the same direction either. Everything you said is true, but I'm talking about a case where you have this person-to-person relationship, where you care about the other person, where you want the other person to be part of your life, and you want to be part of his life. And where, so far as we are talking about now, where the friendship really exists, even if his life takes a different turn and you don't share the same activities you used to share, that bond, that wanting to be part of each other's lives remains. It remains. I'm talking about where it remains. It might not, but I'm talking about where it does. What I'm saying is, when you have that kind of relationship, what do you want for the other person? And I'm saying what you want for the other person is what's really good for the other person. Now, you have to decide, in your mind, what's really good for him. You might not agree with him on that. Okay, so you don't agree. So what? You still want what's good for him. Let's say he's doing things that are medically bad for his health, and he thinks they're good for his health. You look at that as a tragedy. He's really hurting himself.
What I mean is, if you read on the news a story about a terrorist attack, and there's a Jew that got hurt, so it bothers you. Hopefully, it bothers the person because he's a Jew and you care about him. So this level of caring about a person based on a shared philosophical worldview and a shared history, does this fall under, my question is, does this fall under the shared activity, or is this deeper than a shared activity, because a shared activity has there's a certain connotation of subjective enjoyment, whereas caring about someone because of a philosophical bond can go deeper than a shared activity.
If that's the question, I think it is deeper, but it's not. It's still in the same category. The test that you have to apply is, suppose you stop sharing that, whatever it is. Suppose you stop sharing it. Would you still feel connected to the person and want your lives to be shared or not? And if the change in his activities means that the bond is going to be severed, then it's not the kind of person-to-person relationship I'm talking about. Yes, bowling is one activity, political activity is another activity, saving lives in Ukraine is another activity, and living up to philosophical truth is another activity, and the activities aren't equal with one another, but it's all shared activities. Because if he changes his activities, you won't have that connection anymore. That puts it on the shared activity side.
So the difference would be if my friend Aaron stopped being religious, and I say, oh, that guy Aaron, we haven't spoken in a few years, and he went his own way, and I don't really say that with any sadness in my heart, let's say, versus I say, oh, my friend Aaron, what a tragedy, and I feel a sense of loss.
And you still write to him, and he writes back to you, and you're sharing because you want to be part of each other's lives. It's just that now he writes in Hindi, right, instead of writing in English, right? So that's the kind of bond that I'm talking about. And now I ask, when people have that bond, I don't think the bond is genuine unless they want the best for the other person. Of course, the best according to their own thoughts. Whose thoughts should they use other than their own thoughts? Just like you won't give a bottle of gin to somebody just because he wants it. So because you know it's not good for him, even though he wants it. So here, if you know you have a picture of the philosophical truth and he's not living that truth, you regard that as a tragedy. And you can tell him, I think of you as living in a terrible tragedy because you're not living with this profound truth. And he says, I return the compliment. I feel the same way about you. Fine, tell me what you're doing next week, where are you going next month. I would like to send me pictures. I would like to see what you're doing, so forth and so on. At this point, you just, because the bond is a person-to-person bond. It's not a shared activities bond. But then what you want is really good for him. Now, when you stop and think about it, and think about cases, so some things can be surprising. Here's an example. You must have had this experience probably more than once. You look at somebody doing something and you say, if he only knew how bad that looks, what he's doing, he would never do it. He's really shooting himself in the foot. If only he would know how bad it looks, he would never do it. And that's true. If he would know how bad it looks, he would never do it. Why doesn't he know how bad it looks? Why not? Because no one told him. No one told him? Doesn't he have friends? Yeah. He has friends, now in quotation marks. He has friends. But then, why did his friends tell him? He's hurting himself. Because a lot of friendship is based on mutual flattery. I'll tell you you're good, you tell me I'm good, we both feel good, and we go home, right? But is the flattery really good for the other person? Or let's say the flattery minus any real feedback from which he could gain a better perspective of himself and really improve his life? Now ask yourself, with the people from whom you have friendships, and you feel that they're good friendships, how often do you say to the other person, listen, I have to share this with you. You are doing X, and it's hurting you. It's hurting you. So I care about you. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to lose out. So I'm sharing this with you because I love you, because I feel for you. I think it's very rare. I saw Hillel Goldberg wrote a book about the Muslim yeshivas in Europe. So I guess this goes back 130 years, 150 years. And in some of them, they had the following practice. They had groups of 8 boys. They used to meet once a week. And each week, 7 of the boys would write out their observations of the 8th boy, without signing. So every 2 months, you would get 7 pieces of paper with 7 observations of how people see you. These are people who care about you. They're in the same chabura with you. What a valuable thing that is. You know you're sometimes short-tempered. You know that you're coming late and it disturbs the shir for everybody else. You know that you're sometimes distracted in prayer and people can see it and visible, and you distract other people that way. So, and first of all, the person might not even know that he's doing it because it might be unconscious. And second of all, even if he's doing it, he might not realize that anybody else notices that he's doing it. There's a tremendous, tremendous service. That's a sense in which friendship is being used to really improve the other person's life. I mean, one more remark, I'll take a question. I was married a long time before I understood this, but people say about their spouses, we're best friends. I thought, what's that got to do with being in love? Well, it has a lot to do with being in love. Because being in love is a powerful emotion and a riveting emotion and so forth and so on. But friendship is something else. And in particular, you have this wonderful love, infatuation, filled with joy and so forth and so on. Do you share perspectives on each other's faults? Do you do that? No. Don't you wish the best for your spouse? You love her. You love him. Don't you wish the best? You know them now. Let's say you're married 10 years. You probably know them better than anybody else knows them. And you see things in each other and you don't share them, then you're not good friends. You're not good friends. Even if you're passionately in love, you're not good friends. And your relationship would be much better if you were good friends. Of course, it has to be done in a subtle way and in a sensitive way and all the rest of it, but you don't share it, something's missing. This is the, okay. Now, you had a question.
Yeah, bro, I know we don't live in an ideal world, but if we would implement this strategy of this rabbi, or in yeshivas at least, or in seminaries, we would practice this, co-testing thing where we could, I feel like that would add a lot to our midos.
100%. It would definitely be a great addition. Now, I have a suggestion how to start it. We'll run out of time because there's some practical suggestions. One way to start it is this. A friend of mine did this to me. It was El. He's preparing for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He said to me, I'm asking you for a deep favor. Tell me anything that you know about me. One of my chavrusas. Tell me anything you know about me which you think that I could improve. I respect you. I respect your judgment. I respect your perception. Tell me what you see in me that could be improved. Now, if you ask someone to tell you, people in relationships, to a certain extent, keep score, you know. And if I ask Ruvain to tell me what's wrong with me, he'll think, well, I got a chance to tell Gottlieb, these and these are the things that are wrong with him. But really, that should mean that I'd be willing to hear it from him also. So he'll follow suit. And it'll be quite natural, I wouldn't say universal, but it'll be quite natural to follow suit. And then you have a relationship where you trust each other, and you rely on each other, and you can tell the other person, look, I see this happening. And it's not right. It's not right. And you will be better off if you can outgrow it, outrun it, or get some help in correcting it. If you invite the other person to criticize you first, and it's very valuable for you, if they'll do that, and the other person will ask you, the same thing could be true in marriage. Same thing could be true in marriage. So that's one way to break the ice in terms of this kind of interaction. I think it would be very...
Would you say that that's part of the Kenegdo element of Ezer Kenegdo?
In a way, and I think that if you talk about Ezer Kenegdo, so then the pasuk is one-sided. She is Ezer Kenegdo for him. Doesn't say that he is Ezer Kenegdo for her. But I think that it's understood something similar. I think that a woman may be more afraid than a man to speak her mind. She may be more afraid because of what's called the FME complex. I don't know if you've heard of FME. That's fragile male ego.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard of that, huh? Fragile male ego. And she's afraid of the consequences of injuring his precious, fragile ego. And to a certain extent, she's right to be afraid because it's true. Men need to be propped up. But if she's smart, if she's subtle, she can do it. And she does it, it comes across to the man as caring, you will be better in every respect if you could do this. And if you say it that way and say it in a non-condemnatory way, so then you will be much better off. You know what I discovered just recently? There's something on the phone called Do Not Disturb.
Yeah.
Oh man, is that good? That is good. Where did I have it here? Connections, airplane. Here it is. Do not disturb. I was doing videos over Zoom, over the phone, because I was traveling. And people kept calling and everything else. I said to people, how do you turn it off? You know, turn off the ring. Yeah, but the screen comes up and the vibrate comes up. And very simple. You just press do not disturb and you're okay. Anyway, so, yeah.
Okay. So nowadays, a big theme in media and in the secular worldview of love, and probably in many religious peoples, is unconditional love. This seems to be in direct contrast to everything you're saying, and it seems to be, if I see you as a person, then I see the things that you cannot do, right? You can't do anything if a sickness or affects a person, but I also see your capabilities and what you can do, and that includes your sense of responsibility. So the concept of unconditional love is really ignoring half of a human being in terms of...
I'm not sure. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Unconditional love. I don't know that unconditional love means I have to love everything about you. Unconditional would mean that no matter what turn you take, no matter what happens to you, no matter what you do, I will still love you. But part of my loving you is identifying objectively what's good for you and about you and what isn't. And the fact that you have things about you that need to be changed doesn't disturb my love for you, because I love you. I don't love your features. I love you. And if you got yourself into real trouble, drug addiction, and theft and so on and so on, I would not stop loving you. I would just feel more sorry for you and more responsibility to help you. The loving a person is not loving his features.
So you're committing to that second type of, or the latter type of relationship that you mentioned.
That's right. The second type of relationship was what they would call unconditional love.
So it's not something that necessarily is spontaneous, in that you happen to be in yeshiva and we happen to talk about football and we happen to develop a relationship of caring, but it's a commitment a person says where I am going to care about you or try to care about you beyond any of your activities, beyond any of your features. So it is a conscious choice in a sense?
No, nothing I said implies that. You can find yourself, you can find your lives involved with one another and discover about yourself that that's the way you feel. In fact, I think the whole idea of it being a conscious choice sounds to me a little artificial. This is something I find my life entwined with his, and
Sounds good.
if we get cut off in communication, then I'm pining away for connection and contact. I don't think of it as a matter of a choice. You could be committed to working on health. You can be committed to working for peace, but this is not like that. It's a person-to-person relationship where you just care about the person. So I think that's now. So now it's very interesting. A lot of people have this mistake, since you mentioned it. The Mishnah talks about Ahava Tluya b'Dover, Ahava She'eina Tluya b'Dover. Now, literally, that means a love that's dependent upon something versus a love that's not dependent upon something. And people read this with their dictionaries in hand, on about a 9-year-old level, and they say, well, that means no matter what, nothing matters, just loving the other person. That's wrong. For example, it's recommended vis-a-vis God. But isn't your love of God strictly dependent upon his qualities? Because he is good, because he is just, because he is powerful and uses his power in a way to give and to develop and to support. Aren't those reasons why you love him? Imagine another entity which had a lot of power but was vicious and bitter and so forth and so on, like Vladimir Putin or something, right? You say, well, no, it's got to be unconditional. So if God turns into Putin, you have to love Putin also. No, that doesn't follow. If you look carefully in the commentaries there and the examples, unconditional there means not conditional on receiving a benefit. It's not because he does something for you, to you, benefits you. You get a profit from him. Shouldn't be conditional on that. Like the Rambam writes, that you should serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu and serve him out of love, even if there were no world to come. Even if there's no reward at all, you should serve him. Because the love shouldn't be dependent upon receiving a benefit, but it should be independent of his characteristics, of his features, and so forth and so on. No, that doesn't follow. And the word possible is maybe it's the right word here. If a person loved in spite of that, then I think it would be bizarre. We would think that there's something not healthy and not normal about love like that. Comes to a point where a person becomes a bitter enemy. Our Bible does not say love your enemy as yourself. So love your friend as yourself. If he's functioning as an enemy, it is not required to love him, and according to some commentators, it's appropriate to hate him. So I think that we have to be very careful with this idea of unconditional. But the connection can be there, the kind of love that I'm talking about, where you care about the person, and even if he gets into trouble or he deteriorates in certain ways, you could still feel that connection and want to be part of his life and all the rest of it. And but it's okay. It's the connection could still be there. Now, the bottom line here is you're going to do what's good for him. You have to ask what's good about him, what's essential to him. Not every feature of a person is equally essential to his identity and equally essential to his value. Let's say a certain person is very empathic. Yeah, now you can say empathetic. Other language has become more corrupted. It used to be chic to know that it's empathic. Sympathetic and empathic. Now it's empathetic because people broke it down. Let's say he's very empathic, I would say. He shares feelings and he's generous and so forth and so on. And he smokes. So I think there's a big difference between empathy and smoking. The empathy is something which is a deeply virtuous trait, has to be limited and guided and focused in certain ways, but it's a deeply virtuous trait, it's a deeply valuable trait. And smoking is a bad habit that we wish that he would get rid of. So now, if I ask myself, so what can I do for him? Well, if I could do something to support and stimulate the development further of his empathy, I would do it. And if I could do something which could somehow convince him or help him break the smoking habit, I would do that also, because they're both good for him. Where is the dividing line? Where's the real essence of the person? From my point of view, the answer is neshama. Person is essentially a neshama, or an embodied neshama. The body is part of what the person is, but it's a body is a housing for and a tool for the neshama.
What is the neshama?
What is the neshama?
Meaning in a way that the word soul is vague, and the word soul can mean many things.
So, from our point of view, the word neshama encompasses all of a person's intellect, all of a person's emotions, all of a person's goals and values. All of that is functions of the neshama. I can define it only by the things that it does. It's the thing in which all these things happen.
So when you say emotions, animals also have emotions to a degree. So are you separating between the different... so for example, if I go see a play, and the play is a story about a man dying to save his family. So I might feel emotion about that, but the emotion is being generated by something very noble and beautiful on a human level. That's not the emotion being triggered because I didn't have food today or someone bumped into me. So when you say the neshama, whereas an animal may have those emotions, it won't have those noble, higher level emotions, but it will that are about recognizing virtue in a sense. So when you say the neshama encapsulates emotions, are you including the more animalistic emotions, or are you separating?
I would be separating, and I'll tell you just very briefly the way the Ramchal looks at it. First of all, animals have intelligence. Animals can solve problems. and animals have emotions. Now, the life force of an animal, which is responsible for all of its functions ultimately and the way it develops, is called a nefesh. This is in Kabbalistic terminology. It's opposite Rambam's terminology. It's called nefesh, and includes the intelligence that animals have. Human beings have a body. The body has a nefesh, just like animals do, and that nefesh includes a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of emotion, and then a human being has a soul. The soul divides up into in a number of different levels, and the lowest level of the soul is also called nefesh. So nefesh appears twice. One is a part of the physical body, and the other is an element in the soul which is most connected to and most responsible for and most responsive to the physical body. Those are the two occurrences of nefesh end up functioning side by side. So now, when I look at the emotions of a human being, there are some emotions which have the same source as animal emotions, and I think you put it well. Something bumps into me, or I see something good to eat, or whatever it is, and I have a desire for it, satisfaction when I get it, I'm afraid of the other, Those are things which animals feel as well. And if you think about the examples that you gave, in terms of human emotions, all of them were based on intellectual understanding. They all had an element of intellect in them, and that's why they're not animal emotions, because they don't have the intellect to have an emotion like that. So higher up on the level of the soul are emotions and intellect, and they're intertwined with one another. The vast majority of emotions are triggered by fear. Well, if I see the speedometer and the other guy's driving and it's up to 140 km/h, so then I say, well, we're in trouble. Because I can read the speedometer, and I know what that means about speed, and I know what that means about danger, right? The dog sitting in the seat next to me doesn't know anything about that. He's just enjoying the breeze coming in from the window. So the soul is a place where all those features of human life I mentioned. That's where they're situated.
Are its own category, or
what's that again?
Or are they something? For example, there are emotions that the nefesh generates, or that are more intertwined with the nefesh that you said. And there are emotions that are more intertwined with the intellect.
The intellect. We're doing something now, which is probably a 6-week project. We're going to categorize all mental faculties. We're going to we're going to define them and see how they interact with one another. I mean, it's sort of nice, but there was a topic for this evening. I didn't say that there are certain emotions that are intellectual. What I said is the intellect stimulates those emotions. When you realize intellectually that you're in danger, then you become afraid. It's not the intellectual realization that's the fear. It's because of the intellectual realization that you feel the fear.
That's what I meant is that, and then you had the emotions that were triggered because of the nefesh elements.
But there are two nefeshes, right? There's the nefesh, which is part of the body, and the nefesh is part of the soul.
But in all three of those cases, or two cases, emotions are being dipped into or affected by an external thing. They're being affected by the nefesh, or being affected by the neshama, and that is what's generating the emotion within me. So what I was asking was,
I don't think that. I think that some emotions you have are constant emotions. They're not only responses to stimuli.
Right,
this goes back to the old stimulus response description of the human mind, which the world outgrew in the 50s, 70 years ago, where they realized that there's constant activity going on internally, and it precedes and it sets as a setting for the stimuli that come in, and therefore the stimuli that come in have an effect depending upon the independent preceding internal activity. So talking about the stimulus for everything is a wrong methodology. Not everything comes from the outside and we respond to it. Anyway, so that means now if the essence of the person is his neshama, so when you look at a person, you have to think, well, here is the spirituality that I see in the person. That's what's really precious. Everything else is precious only as a means to having an effect on that. So instead of thinking about pleasing him, which is what flattery does, and getting his good feeling and so on and so on, and then discriminating within himself what his projects are and where his projects impinge on his spirituality, where they don't, or where they impinge on his physicality in certain ways, and then asking yourself, what's really good for him? What's really going to benefit him? What's going to make him and he and his position that he's living in better? And then say it to yourself as a friend, how am I going to do that? How am I going to manage that? Now, I want to give you a couple examples of strategy which help to do this, most of which I learned from other people, including, to a great extent, my first wife, and now my second wife. But here's an example, something that actually happened to me. I was here in 1964. That's when your grandparents were born, right? I was here in 1964, and I was riding a bus here in Yerushalayim, and there was a young man smoking on the bus. That wouldn't happen today. He's smoking on the bus. Boy, was I angry. Boy, was I angry. Smoking on a bus. No way to escape the fumes. Right? And I was going to go over and let him have it, even in my pidgin Hebrew. But then I thought to myself, if I go over and let him have it, what's going to happen? He's going to let me have it. I'm not going to get anywhere. What do I want? I want him to stop smoking. I don't want just to sound off and prove I'm right and have him spit in my face. I want him to stop smoking. So I went over to him and said, I have to ask you for a favor. I'm an asthmatic. It's hard for me to breathe. Would you mind putting out your cigarette? Put it out instantly. Because I asked him for a favor. You have to be very low not to do a favor for somebody. I appealed to his better self-image. He's the kind of person who could help somebody else, and he did it without any resistance whatsoever. So now, if I ask myself, if I see something that somebody's doing something, and it's bad for him to do it, to come over and say, trust me, I've had a lot of experience. I know better than you what you're doing. I'm telling you, don't do that. It's terrible. You shouldn't do that. What kind of response am I going to get? To think of how the response is going to be productive for him. Step out of myself and be productive for him. Now here's an example of two examples of very, very valuable strategies. One is called active listening. You're having a discussion. Well, it's a debate. No, it's a knockdown, slugfest argument. I'm right, you're right. He says something. You say to him, I'd like to make sure I understood you. I think that this is what you said. Am I getting you right? This is what you said? You could try that. You could role play it until it feels comfortable. That's a tremendous strategy. Number one, it says, I want to make sure I understand you. I'm not here just to hear myself talk. I think you may have something valuable to say. I want to make sure I understand you. Number one. Number two, when you feed it back to him, it gives him a chance to change his mind, which might be a very valuable gift. I hear you saying this. He may say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Let me say it a different way, or something like that, which will be very good. And the third benefit is you have more time to think of an answer. So it's a very, very valuable strategy for cooling it down, showing concern, showing respect, which will do a great deal to enable him to listen to you and to get your point across. That's one strategy. Another strategy is this. Somebody comes to you and says, I've got a problem. Here's my problem. What shall I do? And you say, oh, you came to the right person. I know what to do about that. I had that problem 6 years ago and I solved it. Here's the solution. It's quite likely he will not listen to you. Why? Because he's struggling with this problem. If he comes to you, that means he's been working on it for 2 months. And people don't just walk around and tell each other their problems. He's pretty desperate because he's struggling with it. If he's struggling with it, he thinks it's a hard problem. If you snap it off, his feeling is going to be, you don't understand me. You think this is simple? You think this is trivial? No, it's gigantic. That's why I asked you. The smart answer is to say to him, wow. First of all, empathize. You must really be in pain. If that's the problem you're suffering, you must really be in pain. And he, in his mind, says, yes, right, you got me. You're on my page. I'm in pain. You're right. And also, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not fooling myself. It's a real problem. And then you say, I'll think about it. I'm not sure. I'll think about it. Then you call him up 2 days later and you say, I've been thinking about it. And he says, right, it took you 2 days to think about it. The answer isn't obvious. Yeah, that's right. And then you say, I'm not sure. Of course you're not sure because it's a complicated problem. You might be wrong, right? And you say, but I think maybe it would help if you try this. You're much more likely to he'll listen to you. He'll take what you say seriously, and he will try it out and be grateful for it. That's another strategy. And the third strategy is this. A critic, especially when you're dealing with religious issues, will want to put you in a corner, will want to paint you as a fanatic. You really think you've got the whole truth, don't you? You really think you know better than everybody else. Now, maybe you do, and maybe you're right. But if you say so, it's over. That's their excuse never to take you seriously again. So in these conditions, I think it's appropriate to say something much, much weaker, which could also be true, not that you're lying, but that you don't have to say everything that's true. What I recommend you say is this. I'm 23 years old. I think I'm at a time in my life, when it's appropriate to be exploring. Right now, I find this interesting and worth my while to explore. That's what I'm doing. It'd be very difficult for a 40-year-old to tell you at 23, don't explore. How would he do that? It can happen in anger and so on and so on, but it's a very weak position to tell you not to explore. Right? Now, you say, in the back of your mind, you say, I'm not really telling the truth, because I have found the truth. Well, that's what you think. You think you found the truth, but you know very well there are people who come in and go out. It does happen. So, can you testify that at 25 you're not going to change your mind? Not really. You don't believe it now, but notice that the people who changed their minds didn't believe 2 years before they would change their minds either. So if you say that I'm exploring, you've deflated the opposition to a point where you're just asking for equal. You deflated there. One more. You said a person says, Freud proved that all religion is irrational. So one way to defuse the situation is to say, I think I understand how someone with your education and your experience would see things the way you do. Education is a positive word. Experience is a positive word. So you're showing respect. And then you say, I'm hoping that you could see how someone with a different education and different experience might see it differently. So all you're asking is for equal respect. That's all. He's again he's claiming that you're a fanatic and he knows that you're wrong. And you're saying, I've learned some things that you, and experiences that you haven't had. And that has led me to see things in a different way. And I would hope that you could understand also that someone had different education and different experiences from the ones that you have had might see something in a different way. These are all ways to defuse the situation, deflate the rabid opposition, and the motivating factor in it is, I want the best for him. And if I come across in opposition, defensively, aggressively, he won't benefit from it. He won't benefit from it. I'll feel good maybe. Boy, did I get him. Boy, did I slaughter him, especially if he's in public. Everybody knows that I'm right and he's wrong, but it won't help him. And that's, if you really want to help him, then that's the way you have to try to do it. Yeah.
I've got a question on something we talked about previously. In terms of sharing with your spouse, I've noticed in my life that when you talk to any prominent female figure, it's hard to relate to her the same emotions that you would with your friends, male friends who you know you're more comfortable with in that sense. So I obviously don't know how it is to be with a wife, but I would imagine that it would be a little bit more difficult to relate the same types of friendly behavior that you would with your friends.
I think that's right. I think that we have to talk about marriage in general, but differences between people always create misunderstanding, miscommunication, failures of coordination. They always do that. On the other hand, differences between people are stimuli to growth. So what you need to have is a commitment to build bridges, because men and women really are different. Don't let them tell you differently. And then we have to build bridges. And I think you're right. The kind of bond of friendship in marriage is going to be differently experienced from the bond of friendship in outside of marriage, because there's so much more going on in the marriage than just the friendship. But it can be there. It can be there. I can speak from experience that there's such a thing as friendship.
Would the Rav say it's a more positive thing to try to build a better connection with your spouse than per se like your best friend of 20 years or something?
Your spouse is going to know you better than anybody else on the planet.
Right.
So if you're missing the input of your spouse that can help you to improve, you're missing something very, very valuable. Very, very valuable. Well, for example, I know, with my wife, she'll tell me something, and I'll realize she's been observing me for 4 months, and she's been waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right way to put it, the right word. Right? I think to myself, boy, she really cares about me. She really cares about me. Not only does she want me to be better, and she sees deeply what I am and what I need, but she wants the interaction to work. And she has the patience and the sensitivity to do it in a way that's not threatening, because I suffer from FME like every other male does.
Is it like if someone is waiting outside this room and I want him to enter the room, so I can either give him a cookie to enter, or I can hit him with a baseball bat to nudge him in this direction?
That's something like that. That's right. And by the way, what you do will depend upon him. Because for some people, if you give them a cookie, you say, you're treating me like a 3-year-old, goodbye, I'm going elsewhere. It's not obvious that there's one strategy that's the right strategy.